Shelley Bell Smith, and I'm wanting to talk to you today about the adolescent literacy crisis, understanding and addressing the challenges. And this is something that is very near and dear to my heart, as many of you potentially have the same kind of interest in helping struggling readers. So here are the goals today, where we're going to look at the extent and significance of the adolescent literacy crisis in the United States. We're going to recognize the factors that are affecting the current literacy reality for adolescents. We're going to outline initial steps to address the issues that we face together, and then look at some comprehensive whole school strategies to address the needs of these students. So I work for a nonprofit called Mass Insight Education and Research, and we are based in Massachusetts, but we work nationally. You can see on this slide some of the partners that we have worked with in the last few years. I have worked with the Pennsylvania Department of Education for the past 4 years. And just a little bit about me, I started my career as a high school English teacher, and then served as an elementary and middle school administrator, later as a district administrator. And during that time, really found this huge need for literacy. And along the way, I also developed some knowledge about dyslexia and how this really impacts the needs of our students and for teachers serving them. And as I mentioned before, been working in Pennsylvania with the lowest performing schools. Those are called comprehensive support and improvement schools for the past 4 years. And I love my schools. So just a little bit, I'm sure most people are very familiar with the NAEP scores, the National Assessment of Educational Progress. It's our nation's report card. And this diagram really shows that we have not really had a lot of difference across the years. We go from, say, about 260 as a scale score to 263. Immediately right after the pandemic, we saw a slight drop, but kind of the long and short of it is that we haven't seen a significant change in our scores since 1992. And I think that that's significant because we've learned a great deal about how to teach reading. And so most people are very familiar with the science of reading, which has become, almost an overused phrase, but we've learned so much about how to do this better, but still we aren't really getting the results in the adolescent literacy scores. And so, what does that 260 even mean? That translates to about 31% of our 8th graders who perform at or above the proficient level on NAEP. And so, like I mentioned, it was a little bit lower in 2019. Of course, the pandemic happened in 2020. So, that's probably expected. For those of you who are more ELA than math, I did the math here for you, and 69% of the students that took this test scored below proficient. And so I think that that is the call to action, the alarm that we need to be really taking action for our students. And just a little bit about the scores, what we had were some declines in a lot of major categories: white students, male and female students, students attending public schools, those in suburban and rural locations, and then also in the Northeast, Midwest, and South. Then we really didn't have much change at all in Black, Asian, Hispanic, American Indian, Alaska Native, 2 or more races, or students with disabilities. And so, it's kind of like the up and down, but it really doesn't change much, because what we see is the gap in the scores between different student groups persist across time. And so, up here we have white students compared to Black students, compared to Hispanic students, to Asian Pacific Islander, and then you even see the American Indian, Alaska Native. And so Mass Insight one of our core purposes is to increase the equity of the education that our students receive across this country. And so this is really where, we are working on this problem as an equity issue. So very recently, in August of this year, RAND put forth some of their research about what are our teachers saying about the struggling readers in grades 3 through 8. And so it was very telling, and I've linked it here in my slide deck, this report, but you could also just Google it, where teachers said that half of class time is spent reading and writing, but that about 44% of their students either always or nearly always struggle to read those instructional materials. So if you can imagine, as a classroom teacher, if about half of the time these students are having problems, that's not going to go well for your class and for learning in general. And then revealingly, about 40% of the teachers who responded identified that they held misconceptions about how students develop those reading skills. And so most of them, about half, said that what they knew about reading instruction was gained from just on the job experience. They had not really been trained in that science of reading that I mentioned earlier. And so, very tellingly, almost 3/4 of those teachers said that they need more access to resources to identify and support students with these reading difficulties. And so this is a huge need in our schools. And so ultimately, talking a lot about numbers, but these numbers represent lives. And if you've ever worked with struggling readers, you know the huge negative impact it can have on their lives, from low self-esteem, anxiety, depression, just this unwillingness to even engage in academic work. And a lot of times they're acting out to avoid embarrassment. And so it is more than just reading. It is that social emotional component that we know is huge in students' development as adults. So kind of the long view of it, however, is, what happens to these students after they leave school? They have poor employment opportunities, lower income. A lot of times they're on welfare. They have higher levels of crime. They, again, because they are limited in their reading, are just very limited in what they can do in their own lives, whether that's read a medicine bottle, read important financial information, apply for jobs, get continuing education to get a better job. And so all of those things are what's at stake for these students. And so many of you have seen the classic RTI triangle many times, and we've talked about it being upside down for a very long time. But what we see in many of the secondary classrooms that I work with, and that includes, like, say, 4 through 8, that we have a lot more kids in the red and the yellow than we do in the green. And so it's very difficult to move this data, especially because we are trying to do this in a setting that's not designed to do it. And so how we got here, if you have been in middle schools and high schools, you know that you're inheriting the gaps in foundational reading from those earlier grades, and you don't really have any control over that. And then we also add in the fact that we don't necessarily have the right instructional approaches to help these students. The standards themselves shift. And so therefore, after 3rd grade, and even especially after 5th grade, there's no call to action to teach these standards for foundational reading anymore. And then there's this idea that it's the ELA teachers that are going to be able to fix this. And I can tell you, as a former ELA teacher, that doesn't work very well, because many of us did not get that training either. We have an increasing number of English language learners and students with disabilities, students with IEPs. And then you add in this little fun thing called a global pandemic. And it seems like, there was a perfect storm creating the situation that we're in. So, there are many things that are being done right now to improve reading, but I feel like there are some factors in why we aren't making more progress. And, one is this culture of quick fixes. And so, I mentioned I worked with low performing schools. And so there's oftentimes this rush to get our scores up because we are being measured by our scores. Unfortunately, that often leads to things that don't last and things that don't actually translate to results. A lot of times we're buying a lot of programs, but then we don't implement them well. And then, back to that RAND report, we have a lack of training for the teachers that are teaching in the middle and high school setting. And then finally, just a lack of systems to address the needs of these struggling readers. And then you add in just the nature of adolescence, because teenagers, and I would say 4th through 12th grade, there's so many other factors involved. These students are looking at their cell phones. We know that that's a major issue right now in many of our schools, but the nature of being an adolescent certainly complicates making more progress. So, here's what we've really been advocating for, which is transforming the system. We can't do this in isolation. And so we've got to, number one, be very honest about the reality that we're facing now. And so this is something that in all spaces and looking at our systems, that we're talking to parents and students in our community, because I will tell you, parents know that their children are not reading in the way that they wish that they were, and the students themselves know. And so when we do not come forward with that kind of direct communication, then it sets us up for failure from the beginning. And so here's some of the things that we're proposing. Number one, using the data to inform our approach. And this is really the school-wide approach where every teacher is teaching reading and writing strategies, because it cannot be just our ELA teachers. It's too big, it's too much. It's never going to move if we only have a few people working on it. This is one of those all hands on deck kind of situations. And then something that really emerged out of the pandemic was class-wide interventions, and the term Tier 1.5 came out of this. And this is really, we're seeing it nationwide, where we have so many students who need this kind of support that we can't relegate it to the typical Tier 2 and Tier 3 settings. So doing this in the Tier 1 classroom, and we're having some good luck with that. Mentioned tiered instruction. I think most of our schools have MTSS approaches, and really, however, it's limited by things like schedules and intervention blocks, and who can read, or who can deliver the kind of reading intervention that our students need. And then we also know that there are students with significant reading difficulties that are going to need very specialized instruction. And so this is a major undertaking, one that will need the systemic approach rather than an ad hoc one. And so these are just a few of the ideas that we have. We'd be happy to talk to you and anyone at your school or district about your adolescent literacy program. Part 2 of this webinar is going to be the IES guide in action. It's going to be on November 20th at 3:30 p.m. And in this webinar, we're going to talk about 2 evidence-based strategies that we're working with schools right now on to help improve adolescent literacy. And then the other thing that we can offer right now is a 1-hour pro bono consulting opportunity. You can email us and access this. So we'd be happy to just talk to you about, how we can assist and support. And this is my contact information. I'd be happy to talk to you, and just kind of want to end with the fact that literacy is one of the major civil rights issues of our time. Our children's future and our nation's democracy depends on us addressing this now. And so that's just a quote from Allison Rose Sokol, and she's with Ed Trust, and I really follow and like her insights on this situation. And that is our message for today. Thanks so much for tuning in, and hope to hear from you soon.